What if I told you that the most terrifying kings in history didn't just kill their enemies? They broke them body and soul. Asterisk, they invented punishments designed not only to end life, but to erase dignity. Asterisk, their victims were stripped, paraded, mocked, and mutilated before their families and entire cities, not as criminals, but as living warnings. Asterisk, because for these rulers, power wasn't just about control, it was about domination so absolute that even a person's shame belonged to the crown. Asterisk. This is the story of the monarchs who turned punishment into humiliation, rulers whose cruelty reached into the most intimate corners of human suffering. On a cold August morning in 1570, inside the glittering halls of the Kremlin, Tsar Ivan IV of Russia summoned a rival prince accused of conspiracy. Asterisk. But execution alone wasn't enough. For Ivan. Asterisk. Before the royal court, noblemen, priests, and women, the prince was stripped naked. Ivan mocked him as executioners castrated him where he stood. Then, broken and bleeding, the nobleman was paraded through Moscow's streets before being executed. Asterisk. This wasn't an isolated act of madness. It was policy. Asterisk. After the death of his wife Anastasia, Ivan's paranoia grew monstrous. He created the Oprichnina, a private army dressed in black who terrorized Russia in his name. Asterisk. Eyewitnesses like the German mercenary Heinrich von Staden wrote that Ivan personally watched and often participated in public mutilations. Asterisk. Women from rebellious cities like Novgorod were publicly violated, nobles were humiliated before death, and even their wives were stripped before the court. Asterisk. For Ivan, pain wasn't enough. Shame was the true punishment, a lesson carved into Russia's memory through blood and fear. Nearly 500 years earlier, far from Moscow, another ruler turned humiliation into a state weapon. Asterisk. In the year 1000, Caliph Al-Hakim Bioma Allah of Egypt ruled Cairo with eccentricity that bordered on insanity. Asterisk. He banned women from leaving their homes, even ordering shoemakers to stop making women's shoes. Asterisk. Those caught outside were stripped and flogged in the streets as the crowd watched in silence. Asterisk. Al-Hakim's obsession with purity and control extended deep into the private lives of his subjects. Asterisk. Merchants who sold forbidden foods were castrated in public, and men accused of looking at women were punished by being mutilated, then forced to live as women dressed in female clothing for life. Asterisk. Chroniclers describe a ruler consumed by paranoia, who used degradation as divine justice. Asterisk. When conspirators were found, he had them paraded backwards on donkeys, mocked by the people, mutilated, and finally executed. Asterisk. Even in death, their humiliation lingered as a warning carved into the streets of Cairo in 15th century France. King Louis XI, known as the Universal Spider, wove webs of intrigue and torment. Asterisk. A brilliant strategist. He understood that humiliation could destroy an enemy's spirit faster than execution. Asterisk. He had iron cages built, so small that prisoners couldn't stand or lie flat. Asterisk. Inside, nobles spent months or even years, stripped of dignity and displayed publicly so the people could mock them. Asterisk. One of his victims, Cardinal Jean de la Balue, spent 11 years like this, naked at times, confined like an animal. Louis even used marriage as punishment. When a duke rebelled, Louis forced the duke's daughter to marry the royal executioner, the man who had killed her father. Asterisk. The marriage was consummated under supervision to prove its legitimacy. Asterisk. This was not just cruelty, it was psychological warfare. A king rewriting the meaning of honor in front of an entire kingdom. Few names inspire more fear than Vlad III of Wallachia, the man who inspired the legend of Dracula. Asterisk. While history remembers him for few realize how deliberately he used humiliation through violence. Asterisk. According to Transylvanian and German sources, women accused of adultery were impaled through intimate areas, and their naked bodies displayed as moral lessons. Asterisk. When an Ottoman envoy refused to remove his turban before Vlad, he had the turban nailed to his skull, a grotesque symbol of pride punished. Asterisk. One courtier accused of adultery had his organs forced into his mouth before impalement. Asterisk. Vlad didn't flinch. He often ate meals beside the dying, watching the life drain from their eyes. Asterisk. To his enemies, he was a monster. In 14th century India, the Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq ruled Delhi with brilliance, twisted by cruelty. Asterisk. The Moroccan traveller, Ibn Battuta, who served at his court, recorded punishments that blurred the line between justice and spectacle. Asterisk. Rebels were forced to wear donkey skins and paraded through the capital while crowds spat and laughed. Asterisk. High-ranking officials accused of treason were stripped, humiliated, and castrated before execution. Asterisk. One governor who rebelled was made to ride backward on a donkey through Delhi, mocked by the mob before his mutilation. Asterisk. When a courtier was accused of an affair with a woman from the royal harem, Tughlaq ordered him stripped and whipped in front of the court, then executed. Asterisk. The woman was stoned to death after being forced to watch. Asterisk. These weren't acts of passion. They were calculated displays meant to terrify anyone who might disobey the Sultan's will. Asterisk. To his people. A warning across the seas. In Tudor England, King Henry VIII wielded shame like a political weapon. Asterisk. His reign is remembered for his 6 marriages and the English Reformation, but behind the royal facade lay a man who humiliated those closest to him. Asterisk. When Queen Anne Boleyn was accused of adultery, Henry staged a public trial filled with explicit accusations. Asterisk. Before the entire court, the Queen of England was forced to listen as her private life was dissected for entertainment. Asterisk. Her supposed lovers were executed, and she followed them to the scaffold soon after. Asterisk. His 5th wife, Catherine Howard, faced the same public humiliation, her alleged past exposed in gruesome detail before her beheading. Asterisk. Even nobles who crossed Henry weren't spared. Asterisk. He arranged forced marriages between noble women and men of low birth, old age, or poor reputation, not to unite families, but to destroy them. Asterisk. For Henry, humiliation was a tool of domination, a royal decree that no one, not even a queen, was beyond his control. In medieval Spain, Peter I of Castile, known to his enemies as Peter the Cruel, turned vengeance into ceremony. Asterisk. When his half-brother Fadrig was accused of conspiracy, Peter ordered him paraded half-naked through Seville before execution. Asterisk. But his cruelty extended beyond the battlefield. Asterisk. He forced the wives and daughters of rebel nobles to serve at his court as maids or to marry his soldiers. Acts designed to destroy family honor. Asterisk. One widow was even compelled to marry the very executioner who had killed her husband. Asterisk. She obeyed under threat that her children would die if she refused, across centuries and continents. The same pattern repeats, rulers using the body as a battlefield for power. Asterisk for Ivan. Shame replaced the sword. For Al-Hakim, purity became tyranny. For Louis, cages became stages of ridicule. Asterisk for Vlad and Tughlaq. Public mutilation became theatre. Asterisk, and for Henry and Peter. Humiliation was the currency of control. Asterisk in their courts. Punishment was no longer justice, it was performance. Asterisk, the screams of the condemned were not hidden. They were orchestrated for an audience. Asterisk, because what terrified people most wasn't death. It was being seen powerless, naked, humiliated before the eyes of their king. Asterisk, these stories remind us that throughout history, power often reveals itself not through mercy or reason, but through the need to dominate completely. Asterisk, and when power meets paranoia, the human body becomes the stage upon which tyranny writes its name in blood and shame. This was the kings who turned punishment into humiliation, a chilling reminder that the pursuit of absolute power often ends in the destruction of the very